Hey, good afternoon, everybody. This is the Two Old Farts. My name is Chuck.
I'm Lou. I'm the half-ass of the two old farts. I forgot, but my flipper again today.
Uh-oh. I
So
guess you're not the
anyway,
better. I guess you're not the better looking of us today.
so now you're gonna be looking into the mouth through that big old hole, but we're getting there.
We are. It's a process. I've gone through it myself.
Yeah, it is. Before we get started, I want to give a shout out to my good friend and to your friend Dan Butler. He just got out of the hospital. He was
Okay.
in the hospital. They released him yesterday. He had lost all feeling in his right hand.
Really?
Not sure what caused it. Doing some MRIs and things like that, they found a cyst on his brain. They think that may be causing that. They don't know yet, and they found a couple other things too. In the next few weeks, they're going to be running some more extensive tests on it, especially about that cyst and those kind of things. We want to keep Dan in our prayers, and he's a DAV buddy, and he was actually a commander when he was in Alabama. He lived in Tuscaloosa for a long time, and he was the chapter commander there, and did a lot with claims to help veterans and stuff like that. And of course, when chapter 114, he was chapter 14 rather, he was our treasurer. And now he and I belong to chapter 114. They keep Dan and his wife Jan in our prayers.
Okay.
You never know about life and what kind of turns it's going to take. He actually lost almost 100 pounds of weight, 78 pounds, I think that's what he told me. But watch his diet and watching what he ate and cut down how much he ate and stuff like that. But Dan's also had a heart replacement type thing and, some other stuff. So not a heart replacement, but, some operations where you had to insert things. So anyway, I just want to throw that out there and keep Dan in our prayers and Jan and anything we can do for him.
Okay.
Whenever you came online, we got two good basketball games this weekend. One today for the women's national championship, South Carolina and UConn. That's going to be a good one. Who do you think's going to win?
Pulling for UConn.
I like Coach Daly. I like both those coaches. They both have really done well in women's basketball, but I'm going to go with South Carolina. So the
Okay.
Final Four tomorrow night between Florida and Houston. Who do you think?
Houston and Florida.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going with.
I think so too, but I'm going to tell you what. Houston pulled it out last night big time over Duke. That was a surprise. It was a surprise to me anyway, because I figured Duke, especially where they handled Alabama, the Final Eight type thing. So two good games, one today and one tomorrow night here in San Antonio, the Final Four.
Yeah, that's right. It's here in San Antonio.
Yeah. Anyway, your mom and I are talking. We've been going back and forth on this water business, which is better for you, just regular drinking water, alkaline, or electrolytes and stuff. So, well, just when you and I were talking a few minutes ago, just before we came online, so I did a little research about what's better for you. So, what do you think's better?
It probably depends. I know probably or read more about electrolytes than alkaline or the pH of the water. I don't really know much about that.
Yeah, you're right. It's all about what you need to, I guess. And what they were telling me, and they compared all different types of water. Like for daily hydration, filtered tap water or spring water are generally considered safe and healthy choices, offering good balance of purity and essential minerals. So tap water, there's some pros. I won't go into the pros or anything, but the cons, it may contain trace contaminants to the EPA's set limits for those on tap water. Of course, filtered water requires investment in a filter system. You got to spend the money to get it, then you got to keep it up. The spring water can be more expensive than tap water. Purified water may lack essential minerals. The mineral water can be more expensive than tap water. And of course, distilled water may lack essential minerals. And alkaline water, there's limited scientific evidence to support its health benefits and can be expensive. Yeah. Give you an example. I go to HEB and buy, and there's a big difference between what I buy for 9 bottles at HEB of electrolyte water is like $12. I can go to Costco and get 12 bottles, larger bottles, for $9.99. So it's depending on where you want to buy it at, stuff like that. But when they said alkaline waters are good for you, because your mom and I have been back and forth several times on this water stuff. So we kind of went away from the electrolytes to the alkaline water. Alkaline has a higher pH than normal water, which some believe helps keep our bodies in balance or hydrates us more. The good news, your body is already good at keeping itself in check and goes to great lengths to maintain hemostasis without the addition of alkaline. So if you don't really need
Probably
it
an
for,
advertising gimmick, huh?
yep. And then they talk about electrolyte water. It can be beneficial, especially during physical activity in hot weather or when experiencing illness, as it helps maintain fluid balance and replenish electrolytes lost through sweating, vomiting, or diarrhea. Electrolytes are essential, have essential minerals like potassium, sodium, and chloride that help regulate balance. It's also crucial for maintaining proper hydration overall. Then it goes on to some benefits and things like that.
Sounds an awful lot like Gatorade.
Exactly. Are they necessary for everyone?
Where was Gatorade invented?
Do what?
Where was
It was in
Gatorade
Florida,
invented? The University of Florida.
University of Florida. Is it necessary? Most people abolish diet and sufficient water intake or enough to maintain electrolyte levels. However, during strenuous exercise, hot environments, or when sick, it can be beneficial. The downside, and I didn't realize this, overconsumption of electrolyte drinks can lead to electrolyte imbalances, so it's important to listen to your body. And that's really kind of what got this conversation started with your mom and I, because we're going back and forth, and she's been feeling just a little bit different, drinking the different types of water and stuff. So we've been having this conversation for the last couple of weeks, she and I, about which water to drink and all those kind of things.
Hmm.
So we decided we're just going to get good old drinking water. I'll keep the electrolytes so when I'm doing something physical and things like that, they help with the body. And if something that she needs, I got some little small bottles, like 10-ounce type bottles, stuff like that. So bottom line is good old drinking water, probably the best for you. I thought that was interesting, especially since your mom and I have been having this conversation about, which water to drink, which is for you. Depends on where you go on the internet and look, I guess.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts?
I definitely lean towards the what do you call it?
Electro
The electrolytes. Yeah. I'm big Gatorade G2 fan.
Okay.
G2 has less sugar, so the rest of the sweetening, I guess, that the little bit of sugar that's there is made up on artificial sweeteners. Of course, there are a whole lot of people that are against those. But if you're going to drink a lot of Gatorade and electrolyte type drinks, you probably should have less sugar.
Well,
But at the same time, you can have too much electrolytes.
exactly.
It can cause imbalances there, which I think, like the electrical currents in your body, I think it can disrupt.
So, because you work out a lot, you do a lot of running and jogging and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
ever?
So too many electrolytes, it can cause confusion, nausea, headaches, high blood pressure, diarrhea, muscle cramping, irregular heartbeats, abdominal pain, seizures, swelling, dizziness. So, basically, it's like the old adage, too much of anything or a good thing is not a good thing. Everything in moderation is how we
How
should
do
do
you how do
things.
you balance that out?
Well, I don't drink Gatorade like all the time. I do try to drink a lot of water, but like you said, if you've been outside doing something that's very strenuous, it's probably a good idea to replenish your electrolytes first with some Gatorade or some other sports drink, if you will, that has the electrolytes, and then continue to hydrate by drinking water. But by the same token, if you're going to be doing something strenuous tomorrow or the next day, you should start hydrating today. You don't start hydrating the day of, you start the day before. So, yeah. And then, because I was in the army, they always teach you to look at the color of your urine. If you're not peeing clear or close to it, you probably need to hydrate.
Yeah, the key to it, I guess, is staying hydrated.
Always, always stay hydrated. And not only that, ladies, the more you hydrate, the better it is for your skin. Makes your skin look beautiful. So there's a
That's
reason to
me.
drink water
I
right
guess I
there.
must be doing something right. I got all this beautiful skin. Look at this.
Yeah,
Pretty.
you've been drinking a lot of water.
No one on the better looking of the two old farts.
There you go. That's it right there.
So what's up with you? What you been doing? I know you had a podcast the other. I mean, not a podcast, but a concert too.
Yeah, we talked about that last week.
Yeah,
The concert that I had gone to. But I was like you were saying earlier before we started this podcast, like, hey, what are we going to talk about? I'm like, I don't know. I haven't thought of anything. And you're like, I hadn't thought of anything either. So I like because you and I both love history, I went and looked at like, on this day in history. And so on this day in history in 46 BC at the Battle of Julius Caesar defeats Cassius Metellus Scipio near Thapsus in modern day Tunisia. I did not know that. In 1453, Turkish forces began the siege of the Byzantine Empire's capital city of Constantinople, which is Istanbul. But what I would like to talk about today is on this day in history in 1917, the U.S. declared war on Germany in World War One and took the side of the Allies. And so when the U.S. declared war on Germany today on April 6th, 1917, they had a sense of, I don't know, hope or optimism that the U.S. would be stepping into, a noble war, if you will, the war to end all wars. So the young men were lined up thinking they'd find glory and honor because, that you look back in history that people had written poems, short stories. It was thought to be very glamorous and whatnot. And when the soldiers, the doughboys, wound up in Europe, they found something different, something that they had never encountered in the history of war. Really, it was just mud and trenches and the newly invented machine gun, the newly invented airplane, and out of World War One came the tank, artillery that never stopped, poisonous mushroom gas, that choked and killed people. So that idea of gallantry and glorious death, it shattered our illusions, and everything that people had been thought or taught about war, they found out it was wrong. And then out of that, some of the things that you and I like to talk about are like leadership. And, there wasn't a lot of leadership out in that war. Some of it came out of it, like we were talking about Alvin York, General
Blackjack Persian.
Blackjack Pershing, exactly. And there were a lot of other generals in World War II that came out of World War One. Let me do a quick search.
Yeah, you had George Marshall, you had Eisenhower, you had Bradley, McNair, Patton, MacArthur.
Yeah, so yeah, you got that right. We had George Patton, Charles de Gaulle, General Montgomery. Who else? General Herron, General MacArthur, McNair. So yeah, you had a lot of those generals out of World War One that were like at the height of their military career by the time World War II came around. And so they had a chance to, shape all of that. But more importantly, another theme I'd like to talk about, I guess, is like the generations of war. I think right now there's at least 5 generations of war, and we're moving into the 6th generation of war. It's how things have changed in how warfare is conducted. And World War One is probably right at the end of the 2nd generation of war to the 1st generation of war, or 3rd generation rather, where it's about the tactics, how it's changed, and the technology that has been derived that were, I should say, excuse me, the tactics that are derived out of the new technology. So in 2nd generation of warfare, where you had the tank and the machine gun and the airplane, as we move into the 3rd generation, which would be World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. Now you get the tactics piece, speed, stealth, surprise, surpassing the enemy lines, things like that. And I think a good segue about how World War One was so changing. You had these battle lines which barely moved, and the sickness, the illness, the dysentery, trench foot, that whole term, that for what happened to your feet being stuck in the boots and wet all the time because they were in that trench. Then you fast forward, what, 50 years, and then you're in Vietnam. And it's a different kind of warfare again. It's a warfare that we have never experienced or fought ever. There were no more lines, battle lines, if you will. We still had helicopters, we still had artillery, but now your cavalry that you rode into horseback on, which was dying out in World War One because of the automobile and trucks, that quote horse became the helicopter. And then you got General Moore, Hal Moore, who wrote that very famous book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young, which took place in the Ai Valley in 1966. It was the first major battle of the Vietnam War. And that's a true portrait in leadership. If you haven't read the book, go see the movie if you haven't seen it already. And you'll learn a lot about what leadership is like. Because he didn't lead from behind. He was out there walking the line with his men, sharing that danger. It's important to do that, and you really didn't see that kind of leadership in World War One because things were different then compared to as they were changing now with social class and things like that. It was just a whole lot of dynamics when you look back from that turn of the century, from the 19th to the 20th century to the latter part of the 20th century, where class and whatnot was not as important as it was back then. And to get your troops motivated, you had to show leadership.
So, in your opinion, how many generals between War One, one, two, Vietnam, Afghanistan, were actually those type of generals were actually on the battlefield, leading them in rather than being behind and making decisions? You're still in the battlefield in some respects because you're there, but you're removed from the actual day-to-day hand-to-hand combat type operations.
Well, sticking with Vietnam, obviously, General Hal Moore, who was a lieutenant colonel at that time, and full bird Colonel Robin Olds from the Air Force. I think we had talked about that a little while back, how he had to take this air wing that wasn't doing very well, low morale, low amount of kills or aircraft shot down, in that transformative culture. And he did that through leadership with him and who was his vice commander?
Batman, Black Man.
Black man, right? His name will come to me. Yeah, between those two guys, that's leadership. That's how you inspire people, by being out front, not from behind. But going back in history, a lot of his soldiers hated him, but General Patton, you know, for despite the ego or whatnot, he was out there on the front with his troops. They saw him. They saw him out there. Omar Bradley, another general. The troops, they truly loved Omar Bradley.
Yes.
I really don't. Nothing
And
really stands out in my mind historically from.
in the Iraqi War, what was the general that
You talking about Schwarzkopf?
Schwarzkopf?
Well, he was more like Eisenhower in the sense where he planned that war and how he executed that war. He wasn't a frontline leader. He was a four-star general who was, like that was his last big hurrah, if you will. And then the next Gulf War, you had General Tommy Franks, who was, the one who planned and led those operations out of CENTCOM. And a lot of his thoughts and ideas was born and shaped from his experience as a first lieutenant in Vietnam. And it's because of that that you now have the soldiers that are deploying, they go as an entire unit. Whereas in Vietnam, the unit, they quote, planted the flag there, and then people just rotated in and out. So you didn't have that continuity and cohesion as a fighting force together. It was just a ragtag band of people coming and going. You know what I'm saying? And Hal Moore didn't really have that advantage, or I should say disadvantage, because they were one of the first units to deploy in mass to Vietnam. But it was from that point on that they, like I said, planted the flag and people rotated in and out. Well, Lieutenant Tommy Franks did not like that. He didn't think it was a smart way to conduct business. And that's why, from General Franks's tenure moving on, we've deployed our troops in mass as an entire unit. They rotate in, they rotate out together.
Well, it's like to be said about that concept. If you and I are together, we're all brothers. But you know what? You don't have that continuity. You don't have the, I don't think the loyalty is if when we go in together, because we don't come back together, families know each other, all those kind of things. I think that probably has more of an effect on teamwork and loyalty to each other than probably like we did in Vietnam. You went in, you put your year in. Some people would stay 2 or 3 years because they got some extra money or they had nothing else to do or had no place to go back to, those kind of things. And it was almost like a job.
Yeah, it was. And out of all of that disparate type of warfare, we also came to the realization that we needed a professional standing army. And that it was out of that era that you had the all volunteer force right on the heels of the end of Vietnam,
Yes.
because people were being drafted. People were that go join the army or go to jail type of thing. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I still think today as a society, I think a lot of young people could probably benefit from that. Like if you don't know what you want to do or where you want to go in life, you don't have much, join the military.
I've always said that if you're coming out of high school or you're just kind of drifting, you have nowhere to go or you have no sense of purpose, go in for 2 years. I guarantee you, 95% of those people will have some kind of purpose after 2 years. You'll know what you want to do one way or the other, or
Yeah, you're
have
going to
some
find out
general,
real quick.
yeah, some real sense of purpose real quick of what you want to do. The military as a career, learning skills. And nowadays, I think the military offers a lot of skills that you can learn that not everybody is going to get a college education for a lot of different reasons. So we need to offer those skills, and that's where you can learn a skill that relatively cheap.
It's just a matter of your time.
Yeah,
You get out of it as much as you put into it. It's just like any other job. But
well,
to
that's
me,
pretty
I
much
think the military is probably the most democratic, if you will, in terms of equality.
yeah,
Everybody gets paid the same. Everybody gets treated the same,
whether you like it or not,
whether
right?
you like it or not. Yeah.
But I tell you, it's what was the movie that where what's it went in and rescued one son because what 2 brothers or 3 brothers already got killed.
So that was a historically fictional movie, Saving Private Ryan. The
Yes,
story obviously was about the Sullivan brothers who lost, but I think in that regard, I think they all died.
all but one,
So
right?
I think if I can't remember if they all died or just one, but because of that, now going forward, we don't send all of a group of brothers to war at the same time.
So, what are your thoughts on that process?
You go back and you watch the beginning of the movie Saving Private Ryan, and General Marshall, when he is there in his office talking to his staff about what they're going to do, he pulls out that letter written by Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War to a mother who lost, I think, 3 or 4 of her sons in the Civil War. That letter obviously meant so much to him that he kept that and had it memorized. And when he read that to him, he said, "We're gonna go get that boy, no matter where he's at, because of the cost of freedom, and who pays that price? Yes, obviously it's the fallen soldier, but more importantly, it's the families who gave up that child to go fight those wars."
And also, when you're thinking about families, and when they all die, how does that family continue to exist anymore? At some
Correct.
point in time, that family no longer exists.
Yeah. Plus, also in that time frame, historically, we were moving away from an agrarian society where everybody lived out, well, not everyone, but a lot of people lived out on farms out in the country, raising crops, animals, whatever. To now, a lot of that has been industrialized, if you will, after the war. We took all of that technology and transformed it into these large, massive farms, large feedlots, because we had to mobilize that type of technology together at the beginning of the war so we could feed this massive army that's fighting on two continents, one in Europe and then one in the Pacific. That's why everything was rationed. Steel, rubber, meat. You may not remember it, but your parents definitely remembered it.
Yep, absolutely. So going back to World War One, do you think World War One had anything to do with the economy and the markets crashing just before World War Two?
Oh man, I think it was more societal things. It was the beginning of the end of the aristocracy in Europe. At that point, all of the royal families were all intermarried. Believe it or not, the royal family that is in charge of England today is out from a German family.
So why do you think Germany was involved in two wars, World War One and Two, and primarily you started with those wars?
Territorial ambitions. Well, you got to remember the First World War. It was set in motion by the Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Austria and Hungary. He was assassinated by a Serbian, and so Austria, Hungary, Serbia. Then you got the Croatia, Montenegro area. Everything that is happening in this era was because of things that had happened in that era. The same thing with what's going on in the Middle East is all of an offshoot because of World War One. When the Allies won, the Brits pretty much drew all of the lines of these countries after World War One, not taking into account the tribal people of those regions of Afghanistan and Iraq and Egypt and whatnot. The tribal, the religious affiliation, all of those types of things. That's why you have these problems in the Middle East today because of what happened in World War One. I can't really speak to from an under of why Germany on the First World War, but after the war, the Treaty of Versailles that ended World War One, that set the conditions for what happened to Germany, which led to World War Two, which was the high inflation because the Allies made Germany pay for all of the war damages and reparations. So all Germany did was just print money, which when there's that much money in circulation, it becomes worthless almost. So out of that grew Adolf Hitler, who was coming up out of that because he fought in World War One. Unfortunately, he wasn't killed by the mustard gas, but he started speaking to people and telling them that they were a good people and that it was everybody else's that was blaming the Germans. You know what I'm saying? Out of that, in that vacuum, he was the only one speaking that people were listening to, and so he grew into power, and that's what set the conditions for World War II.
Okay, interesting.
So yeah, that's all I've got. I
And
can't believe we managed to scrape together 35 minutes worth of
we're trying
BS.
to wing it on the go here for the last, but
I don't know,
yeah,
but by all means, please look into it. If I'm wrong on something, I want to hear. If you have a different take of what you think, please let us know. I want to hear. I love history. So much of where we're at today is all because of something that happened in the past.
yeah,
Russia taking over Crimea and wanting Ukraine, that ain't new. The Crimean War in the 1800s, the Charge of the Light Brigade, that poem, that was the Brits fighting the Russians in the Crimean Peninsula of the Black Sea,
yeah.
which is Ukraine.
Speaking of poems, Flanders Field is one of my favorite.
Yep, out of World War One, yes.
We give a shout out to all of our nieces and nephews that maybe listen, and your cousins. And I think your cousin Brooke is having a great time. She's in New Orleans. I don't know if she's back home yet or not, but she's been out in New Orleans for the last few days. I saw her on Facebook. Look like she's having a good time.
Well, if you're in New Orleans, you better be having a good time.
Exactly. Looking forward to June, the weekend, June. Mom and I going to Michigan and get the Charbonneau family reunion up there. We're looking forward to that.
Very nice.
Yeah, so
Is she going to see some of her other family?
see some of her
The
other family,
boy?
her cousins and stuff like that.
No,
Yeah.
the
No,
boy family.
no.
Okay.
All right. Well, have a good one.
All right. You too.
We'll shout out you down the road.
All right. See you next week.
Take care.
All right. You too.
Love you, man.
All right. Bye.